In the name of God, in this session we will read about other feature of consonants. As we discussed in chapter 1, consonants are distinguished in terms of three parameters: place of articulation, manner of articulation, and voicing. I know that you will be familiar with such terms in the phonetic lesson, and we reviewed them in your first chapter, and now we want to define them according to the features. It is perhaps easiest to consider the features for these parameters in the opposite order. Now we want to define these three feature: place of articulation, manner of articulation, and voicing according to their features. About the voicing and aspiration feature, you know about the aspirated sound, and I want to review it. The voicing in consonants is straightforwardly represented as a feature plus or minus voice. We show those sound the consonant by plus and minus voice. As you know, all of the vowel are voiced. A segment is plus voice if it involves regular vibration of the vocal folds. It is minus voice. Voicing is normally contrastive only for obstruent, like P, which is minus voice, and B, which is plus voice, or C and Z. Which one of them? C is minus voice and Z is plus voice. Vowels and sonorant consonants. Vowels and plus sonorant consonants are normally plus voice. Pay attention to this point, that vowels and sonorant consonant, it means that the plus sonorant consonant, which we consider them as a sonorant consonant, are normally plus voice, but may occur minus voice by assimilation. Sometimes when they put aside the minus voice sound and they assimilate with that sound, contagious sound, and it will become minus voice. For example, in Chino, a language of Mexico, unstressed vowel are voiceless between voiceless consonant. When it occurs between the two voiceless sounds, it became assimilated with that sound and it will become voice. You know about voiced and voiceless sound. For example, Z, B, D, or G are voiced. I mean that they are plus voiced, and their counterpart voiceless sounds are C, P, T, and K, which they are minus voice. They are their minus voice counterpart, voiceless counterpart. Voiceless. So sorry, voice, because we show them by the minus. Okay. Here we have these sounds in Mexico: Tai, Kiano, Suave, and La. As I told you, all of the vowel, we consider all of the vowel as voiced sound. But it is interesting that in this language, which is a kind of Mexico language, the vowel can be unstressed. The vowel can be voiceless. The vowel can be voiceless. But as a whole, we consider the vowel as voice sound. But here in this sound, the vowel can be voiceless when it is between two voiceless sounds. Here we have tire, because it followed by yeah, which is a semi-vowel, and it is voiced. We have the voice form of the e. But here e occur between he, which is voiceless, and te, which is voiceless, and become this sound become voiceless. You can see the voiceless symbol in this way, by this feature, by this diacritic which below which occur below that sound. And here we have the voiceless form of e, because k and c, both of them are voiceless. But here this e is voiced, because as the k is voiceless, but ne is, as a nasal, is voiced. Therefore, because it followed by a voice sound, it is voiced. But here it is between two voiceless sound, and it became voiceless. U is voiceless here. A is voiceless, because a and t, both of them are voiceless. But here le is voiced. And it is true about other data. Consider a CV syllable. A syllable which we have a consonant and a vowel, which without any coda, which we call it as an open syllable. Consider a CV syllable where the consonant is a voiceless. Here the consonant is voiceless, voiceless stop, like p, and the vowel is voiced. As discussed in chapter 1, the dividing line between the segments is not sharp. One aspect of the pronunciation that can vary is the timing between the release of the stop and the beginning of the voicing. If the voicing is delayed for some time after the release of the stop is said to be aspirated. If the voicing is delayed for some time after the release of the stop is said to be aspirated, like pa. If the voicing begins at about the same time as the stop release, the stop is non-aspirated. SPE suggests that the feature heightened subglottal pressure, which abbreviated as HSP, heightened subglottal pressure, or HSP, to express this distinction. It means that the aspirated sound, we show the aspirated sounds, for example, like in we had the aspirated form of p, which we show it by plus HSP, or aspirated form. And another feature for HSP is aspirate glottis, another name for HSP, which refer to the aspirated sound, HSP or HSP, or in some book we consider and we refer to it as aspirate glottis. They are the same. Aspirate glottis. Glottis. They are the same. HSP or the aspirate glottis. This difference is allophonic in English. In English, we had the aspirated p and unaspirated, like in when the p comes at the first of this word, we consider it as an aspirated form of the p, but when it follow the sound like se, like spin, we consider it as an aspirated form of p, which they don't create any definition, any different differentiation in meaning. We consider them as the allophonic feature of English. Aspirated is allophonic in English, but its distinctive is Hindi. In Hindi, two sounds were separated from each other and were different from each other in meaning, just because of the aspirated form of that sound. Voicing and aspiration cross-classify in Hindi, Gujarati, and other languages. Also, the sound classified as plus voice plus HSP. Therefore, HSP is a distinctive feature in Hindi, and it should be referred for description of the sound in Hindi. Are phonetically rather different, as discussed in chapter 1 section, this section. Thus, these languages have sound that can be transcribed by b, b, the unaspirated form of b and aspirated form of b in Hindi, p and p. They are different from each other because when we have two sounds which they are the same in terms of their word, but one of them, for example, have unaspirated form of b and another have the aspirated form of b. In Hindi, they are different from each other, and we consider them as a distinctive feature. Therefore, when we want to describe the Hindi sounds, we should refer to this feature, HSP. The symbol b can also be expressed as b, as we did in 24 of chapter. Halley and Stevens have proposed a set of features to account for these glottal states, as well as other features such as tone. Their feature system is given in 19. In this table, the symbol P represents a moderately aspirated stop found in Korean, as opposed to the fully aspirated stop P. This symbol, represents a voice glottal stop. Okay. This symbol, as you know, the glottal stop by its nature is voiceless sound, but sometimes we have the voice form of glottal stop in some languages, like which we show it in this way by this symbol, which represent a voice form of glottal stop, apparently attested in Jing 4. The symbol B represents a lax voiceless stop. We don't need to memorize these sounds in these languages because they are not very common, as in Danish. The symbol eb represents a pre-glottalized b, though Halley and Stevens provide no example of this sound. Also, this feature set represents a greater range of constraints than it is possible with the features voice and HSP for purposes of this book. Okay, therefore we had for example, in Hindi, we had the HSP for we should define the HSP feature for describing the sound. But here, when we want to describe, for example, a consonant, we should add this feature voice. We should determine the voice or voiceless of the sound. For example, here we have the minus voice because fricative for the producing of C, we don't have any vibration in the vocal cords. Therefore, it is minus voice. And here, P again is minus voice, which is the voiceless counterpart of B, and C is the voiceless counterpart of Z. Therefore, it is minus voice. Okay. Another feature, we described the voicing feature, which you were acquainted with this feature, but about the manner of articulation. The major distinction among obstruent is between stop and fricatives. You know about the manner of articulation, which we remind you of this matter in the first chapter. The major distinction among the obstruent is between the stop and fricatives. The feature continuant, which is another feature which, according to it, we can describe the sounds. Make this distinction. Continuant. Therefore, I should add continuant feature, which I abbreviated in this way, cont, which means stand for continuant. Stops are minus continuant, while fricatives are plus continuant. This much is fairly clear. The application of this feature of other classes of sound is somewhat controversial. We will adopt the definition that a plus continuant sound, it is the definition of plus continuant sound, is produced with an opening in the oral tract, allowing airflow to pass through the mouth. Sus plus continuant sounds are fricative, liquid, glides, and vowel. You should memorize the feature for such sounds. Therefore, all of the fricatives are like s, z, sh are fricative, and we consider them as plus continuant because when we are producing such a sounds, we allow the airflow to pass through the mouth easily with the opening in the oral tract. It is true about the liquid. In liquid, we have just a structure between the tip of the tongue and the alveolar, but the lateral part of our tongue is released, and the airflow can come out through that release. And it is true about the glide. For the glide and vowel, the articulation of glide and vowel are the same. We don't have any structure when we produce glide and vowel, and we can continue them until the time which we want. For example, I can say s, z, sh, l. I can continually produce them, but for the stop sounds like p, I can't continuously produce these sounds like b. We have just the structure for a time, and we can't continuously produce them. Therefore, those sounds which we can produce them continuously without any obstacle at the at the passing of the airflows, we consider them as a plus continuant, like glides, like vowel, liquid, fricatives. Therefore, they are plus continuant. In contrast, a minus continuant sound is produced with a complete closure, like p, like b, like ma, like na, a complete closure of the oral tract. Therefore, minus continuous sound is produced with a complete closure of the oral tract, resulting either in complete interruption in the airflow, oral stop, or redirecting the airflow through the nose, nasal consonant. Both of them, the nasal and the oral stop, like ne, nasal like ne, me, oral like pe, be, all of them are considered as the minus continuant. Thus, the nasal consonants are classified along with the oral stop as minus continuant. Affricate are also classified as minus continuant, since they involve a complete interruption in the airflow for the initial period of their articulation. Therefore, just the vowel, liquid, glides, and fricative are plus continuant, and others are minus continuous. Therefore, here about the C, which is fricative, we say that it is plus continuant because it is fricative. And about the P, which is a stop, we said that it is minus continuant. Okay. Classifying the liquids as plus continuant causes some problems with the trill and trap variety of re, and with the lateral le. The trill involves an intermittent closure of the oral vocal tract, which resembles a stop articulation. The taps involve a single such a closure. Okay, for re, for the flap, we have the closure, tap closure between the in the oral tract. However, the closure in the trill and tap is not produced by the deliberate gesture that characterizes stop articulation. Therefore, because our closure is unintentionally, we consider them as a plus continuant. Therefore, when we intentionally have a structure in the oral tract, we consider them as continuant. But here we don't do this closure intentionally. Rather, the trill and the tap result from a ballistic movement of the tongue that is essentially the same as that which produces voicing in the vocal fold. The Bernoulli effect. Okay, therefore, the closure in the trill and tap is not produced by deliberate gesture that characterize stop articulation. Rather, the trill and tap result from the ballistic movement of the tongue. Rather is essentially the same as that which produce voicing in the vocal fold, the Bernoulli effect. Consequently, the trill and tap are normally considered plus continuant. You should memorize this feature and the sound which stands for this feature. SB suggests that feature HSB, the same feature responsible for aspiration, is also the feature that distinguishes trill from tap. Trill re is plus HSB, while the tap re is minus HSB, which is not common in our languages. The lateral le is produced by a radical constriction in the mid-sagittal region of the vocal tract, thus making it plus consonantal, but allowing air to escape along the side of the tongue, thus making it plus continuant. Therefore, le is plus consonantal and plus continuant according to our definition. This is reasonable in a view of existence of the lateral fricative le, which is dark le, la. And J voice, these are minus sonorant as distinguished from le, which is plus sonorant. Okay, here you can see the distinctive feature of four glottal state. As by aspirate glottis we means HSP. We can see this distinctive feature for the glottal state. Which this feature are not common in our language. Therefore, you should just look at this picture, and there isn't need to memorize this table. Lateral affricate, which are minus continuant as opposed to the lateral fricative plus continuant, where the columns are voiceless voice and voiceless glottalized, representative of the category listed to the right. Okay, here you can see that for example the alveolar stop like t, d and t. T is voiceless, d is voiced, and t is voiceless glottalized. And post-alveolar fricative like sh and j, j is voiced and sh is voiceless. Ch is voiceless, j is voiced, and ch, which is post-alveolar affricative, which is voiceless. Le and le, sonorant lateral, one of them is voiceless and one of them is voiced. And about these sounds too. The non-natural affricate like ch, j, s, z can then also be considered as minus continuant, being differentiated from the corresponding stop with strident. Okay, here we can see another feature, which is strident, which I abbreviated in this form, strident. You should look at this movie many times to be able to describe this sound. The stops are minus strident. The stops are minus strident, while the affricates are plus strident. Please pay attention to this point that stops are minus strident. Therefore, here for P, which is a stop, we define it in this minus strident because it is a stop. Minus strident. While the affricate are plus strident. Sounds, here we have the definition of strident. Sounds which are plus strident are acoustically noisy and are produced by directing the airstream in a complex path rather than a direct path. For the producing plus strident, the sound when the airflow is passing through the vocal chords, we have the complex paths rather than a direct path for producing them. Therefore, for stop, because we have the direct path, we consider them as a minus strident. But for affricate, because we have the complex path, we consider them as because the airflow faced with some part of the vocal tract, we consider them as a plus strident, which characterized by minus strident sound. We will also use a strident to distinguish between certain point of articulation where we will see that we need to distinguish between plus strident and minus strident affricate in Chipuyan. So that a strident cannot be only feature distinguishing between a stop and affricate. We will therefore require the feature delayed release. We have another feature which is delayed release. Del rel, I abbreviate in this way. Del rel, delay release, stand for delay release. To differentiate between a stop, which are minus delay release, a stop like P as minus delay release. Minus delay release, and affricate, which is plus delay release. The lateral affricate are plus strident. Other features for consonant manner of articulation are nasal and lateral, which you are familiar with such manner of articulation, nasal and lateral. This definition, this description is according to the manner of articulation. It is nasal and lateral. It is, I think it is not for lateral. It is very easy because the nasal sounds are common, like me, ning, which the airflow passing through the nasal cavity. And the lateral, we have just le for lateral sound. Therefore, all of the sounds are minus lateral except the le, which is plus lateral, and all of the sounds are minus nasal except ne, me, and ng, which are plus nasal. They are very important. Therefore, other features for consonant manner of articulation are nasal and lateral. A sound is plus nasal if the volume is lowered to allow airflow through the nose. Otherwise, it is minus nasal. A sound is plus lateral if sides of the tongue are lowered to allow airflow along the molar teeth. Otherwise, it is minus lateral, which it is true about just le sounds. The sounds of re and le are minimally distinguished by the feature lateral. Therefore, this flap re and le are plus lateral. The feature nasal distinguishes vowel too. French distinguishes the nasal vowel when a vowel followed by the nasal sounds like ne, me, that vowel, or when it occur between two nasal vowels, we consider them as nasalized sound, like a, and we will show the nasalized sounds by this symbol above that sound. Therefore, when we said that one from the oral vowel a, like with, this e is nasal. Another feature is place of articulation, which we can describe the sound based on the place of articulation. Therefore, until now we introduced the manner of articulation features and voicing features, and the last feature is place of articulation. So sorry. The 1986 revision of the IPA allows for 11 points of articulation or 12 if the pre-palatal, alveolar palatal are reintroduced from earlier version, but it is by no means necessary to or desirable to consider this simply as a continuum as suggested by Ladefaget. The points of articulation falls into clear group determined by the articulator involved. Okay, for here for introducing the place of articulation, you should remember the active and passive articulator, which I will remember it again here. For example, both bilabial and labiodental articulation involve the lower lip, while the dental, alveolar, post-alveolar, retroflex, and prepalatal articulation are involved in the blade of the tongue. There are clear acoustic distinguishes as well. In passing from the alveolar C to the post-alveolar sh, no matter how gradually, there is clear point at which the sound appears to have a lower pitch. The result of adding acoustic energy in the region of the third format, which is present in sh but absent in C, as discussed in section 1.2. The acoustic differentiation between C and sh in the basis of the feature anterior. Okay, that is the bow anterior. A sound is here. You should learn about anterior. A sound is plus anterior if its articulation is forward of the dividing line between C and sh. Bilabials, therefore bilabials, labiodentals, dental, and alveolar are plus anterior. Others are minus anterior. A second binary division that classifies with anterior is suggested by the articulator involved. The feature plus coronal is another feature. Distinguishes sound produced by raising the blade of the tongue. All other sounds are minus coronal. When we have when we produce a sound by raising blade of tongue, we consider them as plus coronal, and when the sounds are not produced by the coronal, the blade of tongue, we consider them as minus coronal. As expected, these two binary features divided the point of articulation into four regions. Okay. According to anterior and coronal, coronal, which remind us of corona, which is the evil virus. Okay, the coronal of the tongue. Here, therefore, according to the place of articulation, we have two other features, which are anterior, which I abbreviate it in this form, and coronal. Core for coronal. According to these two features, we can distinguish sound based off the place of articulation. Pay attention to this point that the anterior, we have two places of articulation. I want to remember this, the active and passive place of articulation. As you remember, we had active and passive articulator in our mouth. The tongue was the most activated organs in the vocal tract. Therefore, the lips, upper and lower, glottis, tongue, all part of tongue, tip, blade, front, back, root, we consider them as active articulator and vocal folds. Therefore, these we consider such a parts of the tongue, glottis, lips, vocal folds as active articulator, which the active articulator move toward the passive ones to produce a sound, and the passive articulator were teeth, which the tongue move toward that, uvula, palate, soft and hard, both of them, velar, epiglottis, and alveolar ridge. Therefore, for producing the alveolar ridge sound like se, ze, this is the blade of tongue which move toward the alveolar ridge. Therefore, that sound created by the blade of the tongue, and we consider them as a plus coronal. Therefore, you should remember and you should review the matter of passive and active articulator, and I review it again here. When a sound, those sounds who are produced by the structure, by the alveolar ridge and labial and dental. we consider them as the plus anterior, and those sounds which are produced by the blade of the tongue, blade and the tip of the tongue, we consider them as the coronal sounds. Therefore, as a whole, the bilabial and labiodental sound which are for producing them, we have the structure in this part in bilabial position and labiodental position, and even in dental and alveolar position. We consider such a sound as the plus anterior. For example, for P, we consider it as plus anterior. For B, it is plus anterior. For Z, it is plus anterior. But about the post-alveolar, retroflex, peripalatal, we consider them as minus anterior. Palatal or beyond, we consider them as a plus minus alveolar anterior. But what about the coronal? The bilabial, for producing bilabial and labiodental, bicoronal we means those sounds which are produced by the tip of the tongue, by the coronal of the tongue. Bicoronal of the tongue we means tip and the blade of the tongue, that two part, blade and tip of the tongue. Therefore, we consider the sound as a coronal sound. For bilabial and labiodental, for the labiodental we produce the sound. For bilabial we produce sound by two lips, which we don't have the involving of the tongue. But for the labiodental, the tip of the tongue is involved for producing the labiodental sound, like sa, sa, which is the tip of the tongue. But when we produce the dental sounds and alveolar sound like sa, za, they are coronal sound, because the blade and tip of the tongue, both of them, the blade of tongue is have a structure with the alveolar part of the vocal tract. And even for producing post-alveolar sound and retroflex and peripalatal, even we have the plus coronal. For example, for producing la, as the two sides of the tongue is we don't have any structure in the two part of the tongue, two sides of the tongue, but we have a structure between the blade of the tongue and the alveolar ridge. Therefore, we consider the lateral sound as and retroflex sound as a coronal, plus coronal. But the palatal, for the palatal, we produce the palatal sound by the body of the tongue. Therefore, we don't consider them as a coronal, and we consider them as minus coronal. Therefore, you should memorize this feature for describing the sound. This for distinction are adequate for the description of English stopped affricate as shown here. For example, P, which we put it in the square bracket and we consider them as a phonetic representation of such sound. We consider P as an plus anterior according to the definition of anterior which we had here. Pay attention, therefore you should memorize the 21 feature here. And T is plus anterior because T is alveolar sound, and Ch is minus anterior because we produce is by the post alveolar. K even is a palatal and beyond palatal, and we consider it as a minus anterior. About the coronal P is which is produced by the two lips and it is bilabial. We don't have the any involving of the tongue, and we consider it as a minus coronal. About the T, which we consider it as a plus coronal because the blade of the tongue and the tip of the tongue, both of them are involved in the producing of T, and Ch even produced by the tip by the blade of the tongue structure with the post-alveolar part of the tongue of the vocal tract, which we consider it as a coronal. And K even is minus coronal because for producing a K, which is post-alveolar sound, which is a uvular sound, we have the structure between the soft palate and the body of the tongue. We don't need to make a systematic distinction between bilabials and labiodentals in English. There are bilabial stop p, b, but not labiodental stop, and in fact there are no recognized phonetic symbol for the letter. Okay, here you can see some language, some sounds, some language. In English there are labiodental fricative f and v, but not bilabial fricative. We don't have such a sounds in English. But here we have in if language we have the distinction between v and the bilabial counterpart of v, which is this sound, and the bilabial counterpart of v, which is this sound, which they are different, differentiate from each other by another feature, which is which I will explain for you in this text. We use a strident to distinguish these classes of fricative. The feature we use for certain affricate. The acoustic noise which characterizes plus strident sound is produced by directing the air stream in a complex path. In a labiodental fricative, for example, the air stream is obstructed by the incisor teeth and is forced to angle downward before it can exit the mouth via the lips, thus executing a complex path and producing a considerable noise. A bilabial fricative, on the other hand, allows a simple straight pass through the lip. Similarly, a strident distinguishes interdental from the dental and alveolar fricative. For example, in English, we have such a sound thin and sin, th and se, which the air stream is direct in th, and therefore th is minus a strident, and se, which the tongue direct the air stream against the alveolar ridge, we consider it as plus a strident. And here I think here in this data it wants to show you the another counterpart, the bilabial counterpart of f and v, not more than that. Okay, and here you can see other definition for plus strident, which is special for other languages, which you can read them, and I want you to read them to be familiar with such features. Please read this text by yourself and ask me your question about them. And here we can see some features of as a whole for place of articulation, according to the place of articulation. For example, for bilabial, like this sound, which is not common in English, they are plus anterior, minus coronal, minus strident, and plus distributed. Distributed is not, distribution is not a feature which is common in English. Therefore, I don't want to consider it, because you will be confused by more features, and distributed is not very important. Therefore, we ignore it. Labiodental, like F, which is anterior, minus coronal, and plus strident, which I explained them in detail before. And here you should pay attention to this point. When we have sound with a minus anterior feature, this is a very important point, that when we have sound with minus strident, minus anterior feature, like for example she, he, he, you should mention this feature, high, low, and back. Therefore, when we have the plus anterior feature, we shouldn't mention high, low, and back feature. But when the sound which are minus anterior, you should mention such a feature too, high, low, and back. As you see in this feature, in this table, bilabial, labiodental, interdental, dental, and alveolar. Enter the alveolar, all the sounds are anterior. Therefore, based on this table you can remember what I told you about this feature. Therefore, bilabial, labiodental, interdental, dental, and alveolar, the sound until the alveolar, all of them are plus anterior, and from the interdental to prepalatal we consider them as a plus coronal. And you can see here the distinctive feature for point of articulation. Based on this feature you can see another way you can see this table according to this feature. Pay attention to this picture and please compare it with this table and define this feature for yourself. For example, he, which is glottal, is minus for all of this feature. Anterior coronal, straight and distributed, and all of the feature is minus. I think this point is not important. It told you that sometimes we have some mistake. We make mistakes sometimes in producing sounds, and for example here sometimes for spell mother we say that smell, which we have reversal of the nasal. It is not an important point. Another important point is about the secondary articulation of consonants. Sometimes I want to read this text and then I want to explain this table. Because the various articulators, which we had two articulators, active and passive, we have been considering are relatively independent of each other. There are segments in which more than one articulator play a role in their production. This is evident in vowels such as U and U, where the lips and the tongue body both participate in the production of the sound. When one or more vowel features are superimposed on a consonant articulation, we speak of the secondary articulation of that consonant. Common type of secondary articulation are palatalization, velarization, nebulization, and pharyngealization, which you can see them here. For example, we have tia. They are common in some languages. Sometimes in English, based on the context, based on the place of the sound, we have a secondary articulation. For example, tia, which is palatalized, high, which we define the secondary articulation based on this feature: high, low, back, and row. Tia, which is plus high, minus low, minus back, and minus row. Or for example, we have labialized sound. For example, we have de, he, te, which this way is plus high, minus low, plus back, and plus round. We have, for example, labialized sound. This is common sometimes at the beginning of the word. I think it is enough for this session. It is enough. You should know about the feature of consonant and vowel, and I want you to look at this movie many times, and you should be skillful for determining the feature of the sound, which for your final exam I will ask you to describe the sounds according to their feature. It is necessary which you learn them, and ask me your question about this feature and about these sessions which we had. Thank you.